Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today on Southwest Minnesota Arts Council's Equipment and Facilities Improvement Grants for fiscal year 2022, which for us runs from July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. I am Carolyn Koska, the Grants Administrator here at Southwest Minnesota Arts Council. And first, I'll just run through what we're going to talk about tonight. We'll start with a brief introduction to Southwest Minnesota Arts Council. Then we'll look at the guidelines for this grant program. We'll go over to our website and take a look at what resources are available for you there. Then we'll head into the grant system and walk through the application, and we'll finish up talking about the grant process. In other words, what happens after you submit an application. I will stop a couple times here for questions, but feel free to enter those into the chat as you think of them. Otherwise, you can unmute yourself and talk during those couple question breaks. And then if you'd like to just stay on at the end to talk more about your specific project, we can do that as well. So Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMOC, is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting and encouraging the development of the arts in the 18 counties of Southwest Minnesota by serving as a source of funds and technical services, which enable local organizations, educational institutions, and individuals to sponsor, create, and promote the arts in their communities. Here is our region down here in the southwest corner of the state. We are one of 11 regional arts councils that cover the whole state of Minnesota. Our funding comes mostly from the state of Minnesota with an allocation from their general fund, but mainly through the Arts and Cultural Heritage or Legacy Fund. We also receive some funding from the McKnight Foundation that we use for some of our artist grants, and some memberships and donations from within our region. Some things that we are committed to: supporting artists and arts organizations in creating, producing, and presenting high quality arts activities, overcoming barriers to accessing high quality arts activities, instilling the arts into the community and public life, supporting high quality age appropriate arts education for all ages to develop knowledge, skills, and understanding of the arts, and supporting events and activities that represent the diverse ethnic and cultural arts traditions of the region. So these are some things to keep in mind as you're thinking about projects, just to know that these are what we want everything to ultimately relate back to. And now on to our grant program for the day: equipment and facilities improvement. In order to apply for this or any of our grants, your organization needs to be located within our service region, which again is made up of 18 counties, which include Big Stone, Chippewa, Cottonwood, Jackson, Candy, Ojai, Lac-qui-Parle, Lincoln, Lyon, McLeod, Meeker, Murray, Nobles, Pipestone, Redwood, Renville, Rock, Swift, and Yellow Medicine, or any tribal lands within that service area. We acknowledge that this region occupies the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. So the intent of this grant program is to strengthen arts organizations' capacity to serve the arts needs in the region. So we are focusing mainly on arts organizations in this grant program, and those are defined as organizations whose mission is focused primarily on the arts, but we will also accept applications from non-arts organizations. If you can explain how you're going to be using this equipment or how these facilities will help you to put on arts activities of some sort in the community. The kinds of projects that you could do under this program, there are a lot. You can purchase new sound and lighting equipment, lots of things related to theaters, getting curtains or rigging replaced, trapdoors, dance floors, risers, a lot of different structural improvements you can think about. We've had people renovate bathrooms, get new elevators, replace windows and doors, anything related to making your space more accessible, um, any signage that's needed. We can also pay for storage that you may need, instruments, studio equipment for arts classes, um, office equipment like computers or printers or software, even down to chairs and tables or office furniture. So that's a pretty wide range of things that can be purchased through this grant. One thing to be aware of is if your organization does not own the space that it's using, you'll need to have a cooperative agreement between your organization and whoever owns the facility that you're using. And the agreement would outline um, how you and that organization operate together, and also how you would be able to access your equipment and improvements, being that they're in a space owned by someone else. So, for instance, if your organization would move to operate out of a different location, hopefully there are plans in there for what would happen to your equipment in that situation. These grants are available for up to $10,000. And in this current year, there are no matching funds required, which means that unless your project costs more than $10,000, your organization does not need to put up any money towards the project. Um, just a note that if your organization has operating support from us, that requests in this program can't include prorated operating costs in the budget. And also, your organization can only receive up to $50,000 for equipment and facilities improvement within a 10-year span. Some things that we cannot pay for in this grant program include new construction or purchase of real estate, activities of a for-profit organization or business, projects that don't have any sort of art focus around them, educational projects within a school system, activities that take place outside of Minnesota, since we are using state funds for these grants. Fundraising events, in other words, the grant should allow your project to break even, not to make a profit. We can't pay for debts that are incurred before the grant begins. You can't use these grant funds as a match for another grant from us, and you're also ineligible if you have a past due final report still outstanding. So that was an overview of the eligibility things to be aware of. If you take a look at our guidelines for this grant program, and we also have some general grant guidelines that apply to all of our grant programs, it's a good thing to check both of those before you get started, just to make sure you're not missing anything. And we'll take a look at where you can find those in a little bit. You'll need to have a start date and an end date for your project. And your start date is as soon as any activities toward your project are getting started. If you're starting to order some supplies and equipment, if you have to make any sort of payments on anything, any advertising, although that's not likely to be part of this type of project. So you can't spend any funds towards your project before that project start date. And so with that in mind, your start date should not be the date of your first actual activity. You need to give yourself some time to do all of the preparations. If there's something that you do really need to spend before that start date, if you have to put down a deposit on something, for instance, really early, you cannot include that amount within your grant project budget that will need to be taken care of completely separately from the grant project. Then you'll also need an end date for your project, and everything that is awarded in this year, fiscal year 22, needs to be finished up by June 30th, 2023. So this year we have 2 deadlines for this grant program. The first one is coming up on September 8th, and the earliest date you can start your project is November 1st. And then our round 2, the deadline is February 9th, with projects starting April 1st or later. And all applications on these deadlines need to be submitted by 4:30 p.m. The system will not allow you to submit after that time. You'll need to have a couple of people that are tied in with your project. The first role that's needed is a project director. There are whoever is really running the project, who knows most what's actually going on. And a lot of times because of that, they may also be your grant writer. Then you'll need an authorizing official, which would be a president, treasurer, or someone else from your organization who has authorizing power. So for instance, if you are the president of your organization and maybe you actually are running this project, so you may decide to call yourself the project director and have your treasurer be the authorizing official. So these do need to be 2 separate people. You can't have one person fulfilling both of those roles. And both of those people will need to sign your application, your contract, and your final report. If your organization does not have 501c3 nonprofit status or is not an official unit of government, which would be like a city or a county, you'll need to find an organization that is one of those things to act as your fiscal sponsor. In the application, you'll need to include the agreement that you have between your organization and the fiscal sponsor organization, just spelling out how everything is going to work between the 2 of you. So somebody from that fiscal sponsor organization will also need to sign your application, contract, and final report. And that fiscal sponsor organization will receive your grant funds. So they are legally responsible for the project and the management of the money. And we will stop now for a second if there are any questions. Feel free to either unmute yourself or type something in the chat.
Yeah, Carolyn, this is Mark. Who do I contact to find out how much we received in a 10-year period? Is that you?
You can can make note of that right now.
Okay.
And I will check that for you.
Right.
So if you're guessing your organization is kind of close to that, it's a good thing to check with us. Otherwise, we will once a year kind of run a report and see which organizations might be getting
I don't think we are, but 10 years is a long time. So
yeah. Any other questions at the moment? All right, I am not hearing anything. I haven't seen anything come through the chat, so we are going to move on. And we're going to head over to our website. So on our homepage of our website is actually the quickest place for you to be able to access the grant system. So I'll just point that out as we're coming through here. So if you scroll down below these slides, there's this black grants box here, and there's a login button right there. So that'll be your fastest place to come back to that grant system anytime. Then we're going to take a look at this workshops and assistance page. There's a bunch of information for you about surprise, surprise, workshops and assistance that you can get as you're working on your grant application. We have grant support open office hours the second Tuesday of every month. From 10 to 2, you can stop into our office in Marshall. You might want to bring your computer along and sit and just work on your application with us right here to give you a hand if you run into some questions, or maybe you just want to talk through some project ideas, but that is available. We also have a couple of Q&A sessions coming up, and these are just opportunities for you to ask any questions about any of our grant programs. The first one coming up this year is on August 10th. You can join that session here from this page, or register and receive an email with the information. You can make an appointment with me. There's a link there in order to do that. And then we also have our webinars. You found your way to this one, but here are all of the webinars that are planned for this year, and you can either register, or if it's past, go back and grab one of the recordings. So that's just some assistance available for you. We're going to head over now to our equipment and facilities grants. So as at the top of this page here, I'll just point out the Apply Now button is the other way that you can get to the grant system. You don't have to actually be applying, it'll just take you to the login. So on this page, you've got our 2 rounds listed here with all of the important dates related to those. And then we've got some materials posted for you here. Here are the guidelines for this program, also our general grant guidelines. So again, make sure to look at both of those documents. We have the application questions available here in a Word document. Some people prefer to work on a draft in that and then paste things into the grant system when they're ready. So if that's something you'd like to do, that's there for you. We've got budget form in a couple different formats, and we'll take a look at that once we get in the application. This explains the criteria that the grant reviewers will be using to score your application. So that's good to look at too, just to know what people will be looking for as they're reading your application. Coming soon will be the questions from the final report, again in a Word document, so you can take a look at that just to get an idea what kinds of things you'd need to answer. And then we've just got a couple of tutorials here for you. So we're going to head into the grant system, clicking our Apply Now button. If you have an account in here already, you would just go ahead and log in. If you're totally new to the system, you can create a new account here. If you're not sure whether you or someone else from your organization already has an account in the system, definitely contact us and we can let you know what you need to do. So we are going to log in here. Right. So if you are returning to the system, you'll come here to this applicant dashboard page. But if you are coming into the system for the first time, you'll be taken directly to this apply page. So that's where we're going to go. This lists all of the applications that we have currently open. So you'll just need to scroll through and find, here's our equipment and facilities. If you just want to take a look at the application without actually starting anything, there's this preview button. But when you're ready to get started, you can click apply. So I'm just going to point out a couple of buttons up at the top here. We have Google Translate embedded in the system. So if you'd like to work in a different language, you can select your language there and do that. We have the copy previous answers button. If you have done an application in here before, you can choose to copy answers over from that to your new application. That's really handy for information background on your organization. That doesn't change a lot to be able to copy that over. Then we have our collaborate button. And this is if you'd like to invite someone else to be working on the application with you. What you would do is put their email address in here. Then you can choose what level of permission you'd like to give them. And then write a little message here saying what it is you'd like them to do, whether you want them to add some audience numbers, or maybe they have the details on the equipment that you're going to be purchasing, or maybe you just want somebody to proofread. But anyway, you can invite them. They will receive an email, and all they'll need to do is create a quick password if they don't already have an account in the system. So when they log in, they will be able to access this application and work on it to whatever degree you gave them permission. Another thing here, if you have some questions or need help as you're working on this, you've got a couple different options. If you click here, you can easily schedule some time with me. You can choose how you'd like to meet, and then it will bring up my calendar here. And you can choose some time on there. Very simple for you to use, or feel free to email any questions to me. This is my address here. So as we are just barely getting started on our application here, you can have a name for your project. There are some examples here, so you see it doesn't have to be very exciting, just describing what it is you're hoping to do. Then you'd enter the amount you're planning to request here. You may want to wait and come back and fill this in after you've done your budget form. And then before we really get going, again, here are those guidelines and scoring criteria that we talked about, and just some tips as you're working on the application. I'll just touch on character limits for a second. You'll see that the fields have really a quite large character limit, just to make sure that you have plenty of room to say what you need to say, but we want to point out that you don't need to feel like you need to use up all those characters. You don't need to fill the box. Depending on what the question is, you may only need a couple sentences or a couple paragraphs. As long as you're touching on all of the points that were asked in the question, that is long enough. So don't feel intimidated by those character limits. So our first actual question here is describe what you're wanting to do. What equipment purchases or facilities improvements are you planning to do? So be helpful to describe those in a lot of detail there. If you're working with a consultant or a contractor, why did you choose them and what are their qualifications? Who are the key people from your organization that are going to be involved in this project? And then what is your schedule for the project? What kind of planning is going on? Then in our next couple questions here, we've got just some space if you want to provide some extra materials, if you want to show some photos of the space, or if you have some technical details about some of the equipment that you're hoping to purchase, and if you'd like to provide any of that kind of extra information, you can do that here, but that is not required. Then here is where you would upload your facility cooperative agreement, that agreement between your organization and whoever owns your space that you're using. Obviously, if you own your own space, you don't need to do anything there. You'll enter in your start and end dates for your project. Then we come to the budget. We've got a couple options for you. We have a already created form in Excel or a PDF. You can use one of those or create your own budget. But we're going to take a look at the Excel form here. All right, here we are. So you could put your either organization name or project up here. And then you've got just a lot of space to enter in any costs that you'll be having with this project. So we're going to get some amounts in here. You'll see it is adding up for us. So you've got that section where you can put all of the costs you're going to have. Then we've got an area for you to put any other funding that you're putting towards the project. If your organization has saved up some money for this, maybe there's someone who has given you a donation towards this project. So we're going to enter that here. Then we've got this little section that helps us calculate out what we can request. So right here, this takes our cash cost minus our other funding. So it says your request cannot exceed $68.50 or the maximum request amount for this grant program, whichever is less. So we'd find here's our equipment and facilities improvement, 10,000. 68.50 is less than that, so we could enter that in here. If, for instance, our project was a little more expensive, then we have our project cannot exceed 11,850 or 10,000, whichever is less. So then we can request 10,000. But then you'll see if you look at this profit thing, this will take a calculation here, and you'll see we ended up with a negative profit, which means we are losing some money here. So we need to come up with 1850 more. Maybe we need to do a little fundraising, and we figured out where that's going to come from. Oops. And we found that. So now our profit is 0. That's your goal. So you would fill this out, save it, and then upload into your application here, right here. There's also a budget narrative field where you can explain anything that didn't really fit into the form, or if you just want to describe that budget in a different way. Just note that in-kind contributions should not go into your actual budget form. You can talk about them here in your budget narrative or somewhere else in the application, but please don't enter those numbers into your form. All right. Now we are looking for some information about your organization. So your mission statement, brief history, who do you generally serve? What kind of support do you generally get from your community? We'll talk about programming later, so you don't really have to put anything about that here. Then just some information about your board and how they're chosen. And we ask you to provide names, roles, and qualifications of board members. You can either enter those into this text box after you've answered this question, or you can upload an existing document here. Then we ask you about your programs. What kind of programming do you offer? And then some more information about how you make your artistic choices. What kinds of things do you consider when you're hiring artists? How do you make sure that your projects have potential for people to develop knowledge, skills, and understanding of the arts? Then we ask you to think about who in your community might be underserved or underrepresented. You could think about groups that might be defined by race or ethnicity, language, socioeconomic level, age, ability, etc. Once you've thought of those groups, we'd like you to think about at least one of them and explain what you generally do so that they can participate in your projects. There's a few examples for you there. Then we also want you to think about your accessibility or ADA access, and how people with various disabilities will be able to access your activities. Then we go back to things more specifically about this project. You'll talk about what your goals are for doing this. What changes are you hoping are going to take place as a result of this equipment that you're purchasing, or improvements that you're making? What kind of changes will there be for people participating in your programs, other audiences or artists? Will this strengthen your organization in some way, give you ability to provide certain activities that you weren't able to before? And what specific programs or events are going to benefit from these changes? Then thinking a little further, how would you measure or prove that those changes have taken place? You'll probably need to gather some results or feedback, and then think about what you would look for in those results that would indicate that these changes we're looking for have indeed taken place. If you'd like to share the survey, if that's how you're getting feedback that you're using, you can upload a copy of that here. And then we just ask for some audience numbers. This is a little harder to wrap your head around with this type of project, but if you think about, how many people would experience this new equipment or improvements during a year of your programming, that's a good number to use there. Then we're just collecting some data that we need to pass on to the state. They ask about what was your most recently completed fiscal year and how much expenses did you have during that year, some demographics, your annual audiences. In this case, that'll probably be the same as what you entered above here about how many people would be affected by this project. And then we've got contact information for your project director, your authorizing official. We ask who the grant writer is in case we have questions and need to contact you. So if you choose other, there's a space to enter your contact information. Then we ask if you're planning to use a fiscal sponsor, and if you choose yes, I know that the system is having some issues today. If you do choose yes, it should bring up a section with blanks for you to enter in your fiscal sponsor information and upload that fiscal sponsor agreement. And then at the end here, we have your signatures, electronic signatures by typing in your name. So this would be a great place to use that collaborate button if, for instance, you wanted to invite your fiscal sponsor to come in and sign this. So we have a save application button down here. Sorry again, the system is having a little trouble today, which is very unusual, but I'm told that it will be fixed overnight. So the system will be auto-saving as you're working in here, but you can also click the Save Application button or the Submit when you're ready. We're going to do Save and see if this works for us. When you click that, you are brought to a screen that gives you a list of what questions you still need to answer, which will help you make sense of how far you are, what your progress has been. So we're going to try and head back to the dashboard again. Sorry about this. All right. So normally, if that had saved properly, you'd come back here and see the application that you started. We just have an old one sitting here, and you'd see just like how this contract here has an edit link, you would have that for your new application that you just started. Right, I'm going to jump back over to the slides here and we'll pause again for questions. All right, not hearing anything. We are going to keep moving on. Just some tips for you as you're working on your application. It's a really good idea to start early just to give yourself time to gather everything you might need if you need to get that facility agreement together, do some research on what exactly you're planning to purchase and what those costs might be, and even just to get any questions answered from us. As we mentioned before, read both of those guidelines documents just to make sure you're not missing anything and you're on the right track. Would have seen in the application that most of the questions have multiple parts to them. So make sure that you're reading all the way through those and kind of checking off each of the parts to those questions. Keeping your answers real clear and concise. Again, don't feel like you have to pad out your application to make it fill up those boxes. And keep in mind that we're really just wanting you to use language as if you were just describing your project to someone you know. Like, here's this thing that we're going to do. We don't need you to write in any special grant language. Just explain what it is you're doing. It's also a good idea to assume that the grant reviewers don't know anything about your organization or your project. We are drawing grant review panelists from around our whole region, so it is quite likely they have not heard of your organization or your projects that you generally do. So think about any acronyms that you're using. If you use them, please explain what those are. I think please explain kind of covers all of it. Just think about what would someone not from our organization, not from our area, what questions might they have about this? So it is a good idea to have somebody who's not totally familiar with what you're doing to read your application, just to check if there is anything that seemed just very obvious to you that not everyone might know. There are several ways for you to get assistance. You can call us to talk about your project before even starting an application. If you want to make sure that you're starting in the right grant program, that your expenses you're thinking about are eligible. You can contact us with questions anytime as you are working on your application. And then we actually can review your application for you before you submit it. If you let us know about up to 2 weeks before the deadline that you have a draft ready, we can go in and take a look and let you know if there's anything you're missing, or if we were really looking for you to come at one of the questions from a different angle, things like that. If it's getting to be less than 2 weeks before the deadline, we don't guarantee that we are able to take a look at it, but you can always ask. So what happens after you submit your application? First, we as staff will review your application for eligibility and completeness. If you are missing anything at that point, you will get 48 hours to fix that. And that is staff's real last interaction with your application. We don't have any say over what gets funded or not. So your application will go on from there to a panel of individuals from around our region. They will discuss and score your application based on the criteria for the grant program, which we'll look at in a minute. And then from there, the panel's recommendations go on to our board of directors, who will make the final funding decisions. So the criteria for this grant program include the feasibility of the project. They'll look there at your budget, your timeline. Did you choose appropriate equipment for what you're trying to do? That is worth 5 points. Then they'll look at the merit of the organization and artistic quality of its programs, worth 11 points, and then the impact of the project on your organization, worth 18 points. If you pull up that document that we went past before with all the criteria listed, there'll be a little bullet points beneath each of these, so you'll get a little better idea of what specifically the panel will be looking for. After the panel does their scoring, there is the opportunity that you may be awarded an additional percentage point for each of the following these criteria that you may meet if you are a first-time applicant to us. If your organization is led by or primarily serving BIPOC or LGBTQ communities or people with disabilities, or if you are from a county that has received fewer grants from us in the recent times. If your grant is awarded, you'll need to complete a contract. And then after completing that contract, you'll receive 80% of your grant award around the time of your start date. Then you'll receive the remaining 20% of your grant after the project and final report are completed. You'll need to acknowledge the grant on any publicity. You might put a little something in your program, for instance, about new lighting that you have in your theater. And in that case, you would want to use the specific credit line that is needed based on the source of your grant funds. You may also need to use this Minnesota Legacy logo, again, depending on the source of your grant funds. And we will send you the credit lines, logos, posters, so you'll know for sure which ones that you need to use. And those are also available on our website. You'll need to do a final report within 60 days after your project end date. It's a good idea to take a look through the final report when you're just getting started on your project, just so you know what kinds of information you might need to gather. If there's information about attendance or outcomes related to your goals, for instance. We also expect that you're going to spend the full amount that you proposed in your budget. If it looks like something is going to change in your project, please contact us and we can get some of those changes approved. But once the grant is awarded and you start on your project, that's not the time to start thinking about where can we save a little money here and here. We do need you to either spend out your full grant award, or you may not receive your final 20% if you haven't actually spent that much. That is it for our information about the equipment and facilities grants, but I just wanted to point out a couple other opportunities that are coming up. There is a webinar on August 5th about our operating support grants. And just to note that the pre-application deadline for that program is September 15th. And then on September 30th, we have a webinar for our Art Legacy Project grants. And the next deadline for that program will be November 10th. Here's just some more ways of contacting us. And I will just open things up here if there's anything you'd like to talk about specific projects that you're thinking of. I didn't hear any questions, so I'll just say thanks for joining us tonight, and we hope to hear from you.